And now it is my pleasure to introduce Luong Ung. Ms. Ung is a celebrated activist and survivor. When the Khmer Rouge rose in 1975, Luong lost her family to the genocide, was forced to serve as a child soldier, and nearly lost her life in the notorious killing fields. She has since dedicated her life to spreading awareness and has been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, and CNN, among others. Over the course of her life as an activist, she's made over 30 trips to Cambodia, where she has been involved with numerous organizations supporting post-genocide recovery, including the 1997 Nobel Peace Laureate International Campaign to Ban Landmines. She's the author of 2 other memoirs, First They Killed My Father and Lucky Child. Lulu in the Sky is the 3rd installment in the story of Ms. Ung's turbulent life. Beginning with her early childhood in the Khmer Rouge and following with adolescence as a refugee in Vermont, this new memoir chronicles her struggle as an adult to cope with the trauma of her youth. As a final piece of the trilogy, it brings Ms. Ung's struggles full circle as she finds fulfillment and love in her personal life and begins her career as an activist. Booklist has said of her earlier work that Ung's memoir should serve as a reminder that some history is best not left just to historians, but to those left standing when the terror ends. It is a pleasure to have her with us this evening. After tonight's talk, we'll have time for questions, after which we'll have a book signing right here at this table. You can find copies of Lulu in the Sky up at the registers in the next room. And last, I'd like to offer thanks to all of you for buying books at Harvard Bookstore and to anyone buying a book tonight. Your purchases support a local independent bookstore and ensure the continuation of this author series. And please join me in welcoming Luong Ung.
Thank you so much. This is really awesome. I once threw a party in high school, and all of 3 people showed up, and one of them's related to me. But ever since then, I've had this insecurity that I would actually have events and nobody shows up, and so I'm really thankful. So thank you so much. It's nice to be here, and it's nice to have an audience. I'm really happy to be here to talk, especially about my book, Lulu in the Sky, because it was such a fun book to write. For those of you who read my other work, First They Killed My Father, which I wrote and published in 2000, was to me a book that was almost a process where I just vomited out. First They Killed My Father was born on April 15th, 1988. The day I woke up and heard on NPR that Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge leader, #1 brother, or brother #1, of a genocide that took place in Cambodia from 1975, April 17, 1975, to January 7, 1979. In a span of that almost 4 years' time, in a regime, a communist regime that would result in 1.7 to 2 million Cambodians dead to starvations, diseases, hard labor, executions. And Pol Pot, the leader of this regime, had just died on that April 15th, 1998. And I remember that for me, that moment, time stopped. And in the background, the reporters were telling the stories of his last interview with a journalist, and how the journalist described him as somebody who was charismatic, was grandfatherly, and somebody who was unremorseful for what he did, and that what he did out of love. He did out of love for the country. So what I wanted to do in my anger, in rage, in my confusion, was I wanted to set down a story that would negate that would somehow, in Pol Pot's grave, allow me with my pens to poke it into the ground, into his eyes, and negate and cut down his legacy. So First They Killed My Father was my story of my family and my journeys of surviving war, of what it took, of the sacrifices we had to make, of the fear and confusion and the rage and the scars of a child's heart. And when I was done with that, I thought I was done. I went on in my work as a human rights activist in the campaign for a landmine-free world, going back to Cambodia, raising money and awareness to help victims of landmines and victims of war. And I'm so proud that in Cambodia, in our center, where we have spent, since 1991, have assisted over 18,000 Cambodians, individual Cambodians with a prosthetic limb, leg, arms, and orthotic devices and wheelchairs so that they may have a chance to walk. So I went on with my life and working for the campaign at this center where we manufactured that and gave it out to survivors as free. And then one day I was turned on the TV, watched the news, was watching the news, and I saw President George Bush landed his plane on SS Lincoln to speak to a group of Navy men. And behind him was that big, infamous, famous sign, mission accomplished. A couple of years later, I went on to the Pentagon website and was trying to find that footage and was able to locate it, but mission accomplished had been cut out. It was missing. And so for me, it was in that moment that lucky child, a daughter of Cambodia, reunite with the sister she left behind, was born. And I came to this realization that how insane is it that we actually think wars end just because presidents declare it so? How insane is it that people actually believe that wars end just because journalists stopped writing about it? Because president signs treaty? Because soldiers have left the land? For those of you and those of us who have been through wars, and in Cambodia, 5 million survived the Khmer Rouge genocide and killing fields. Worldwide, it is estimated that anywhere between 120 to 160 million people have survived some kind of wars, state-sponsored war in their nation. And that's not counting the millions of other people who survived some kind of traumas and violence, domestic wars in their home, in their communities, in their city, on their playgrounds. And how insane is it that there are people out there who actually believe that wars end just because we don't talk about it anymore? And so I set out with Lucky Child to tell the story of what it took to survive the peace. What it took, whether you leave like I did and came to America when I was 10, speaking no English, having no relatives, no friends, no church workers, no community members to show me my life, my new life in America. Coming and traveling 12,000 miles away, dreaming all the dreams that I was gonna have this chance for a better, safer, more fun life. And yet, I arrived on June 20th, and our sponsor, these lovely, wonderful church people who brought us to America, took my family and I to the 4th of July fireworks. That was not a good thing. And as my friends were looking at the sky and listening to the cracklings of firecrackers, eating their hot dogs and hamburgers, and their arms are shooting with sparklers that made them look like electrical dragonflies. As they were doing all this, my skin was crawling and I was sweating because I was convinced that war had found me in America. And how was it possible that these groups of people at the fairground in Essex Junction, Vermont, because that was where I landed, the whitest state in America. This is still statistically true to date. For more diversity, I eventually did move to Maine, the second whitest state in America. And as my friends in Vermont, as they were anticipating the wonderful fire shows, I was trying to crawl underneath a bench. And I was trying to get away from the wars. And how is it that these Vermonters didn't see the soldiers that were right there in front of me yet again? How is it that the Vermonters couldn't hear the bombs that were exploding on them, and instead of crouching and screaming and trying to escape, they were applauding and smiling and taking pictures? I couldn't understand. And so Lucky Child followed my life in America as I survived 4th of July, as I survived sex education in high school, as I survived trying to get a date for the junior prom in high school, and on a parallel track in alternating chapters, my sister's Jew's life in Cambodia, as she survived the landmines that were still exploding on her land. A land the size of the state of Oklahoma that is today littered with over 20,000 mass graves, with over 1 million skulls already accounted for. A land that is tainted with millions of landmines, a weapon system the size of a hockey puck, a compact powder, a coffee cup, that once placed in the ground, they stay active for decades. And it does not care that the foot that step on it is a friend or a foe. A weapon system that after the war continued to claim killed, injured, maimed, an average of 500 Cambodian lives every single month. Years after the soldiers had stopped killing parents and making children orphan, landmines continue its job for them. Today, Cambodia has over 45,000 amputees, and we have assisted over 18,000 plus thus far. Lucky Child follow our lives of surviving peace and what it took. The planning, the strategies, the work, the adaptations, the acclamations of lives in all these different countries. And then I thought I was done. But what is it you say that when you make plans, God laugh in your face? So I went on, eventually lived my life, lived a new life, and then moved, and eventually went on and actually married my college boyfriend, now husband. We left DC, and I left DC and moved to Cleveland, Ohio, of all places. I moved to Ohio for love. I have to say I fell in love with the city because there are just wonderful arts and cultures and music, and all for a fraction of a price of what I paid for in Washington, DC. And then we went on to open a bar and a restaurant and a microbrewery. So now I can eat as much as I want, and I don't have to pay for it, but somebody else does. Lulu in the Sky came to me as a surprise. It came to me not as a conscious thought, but it came to me first with tears. But when I woke up on my 38th birthday, I found myself not waking up with my usual zest to live life to the fullest. Instead, I found myself on the floor cleaning and crying. Two things I rarely do, and never together. And since then, we'll never do it together ever again. And as I was doing this, I realized that I was awash with this sadness, this deep sadness, this sadness that felt like an abyss, that felt like if I opened to it, that I would never get out once again. So I did what many of my American friends and I've done. I went to see my therapist. And after a few therapy sessions, we found and I realized that my sadness had a root. And it was the realization that in 1 year's time, I was going to outlive my mother. My mother died when she was 39. And how was it possible that I was about to outlive her? How was that going to change our conversations? Me, for 30 years, who have looked to her spirits when I look at the stars and the moon and spoke to her as the wise woman, wise mother who could guide me. And in 1 year's time, I was going to be the older woman. How was I going to keep my mother as wise, when I was going to gain all these years, not just 1 year's time, but in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, I was going to outlive her? And how will I keep connected to that spirit when I pass that age and there will not be a single soul on earth who will have a memory of her life here? So I went on a journey to try to find my mother so that I wouldn't lose her again. This journey took me back to my love story. So Lulu in the Sky is a story of the daughter of Cambodia who finds love, healing, and double happiness. And to find out what double happiness means, you will have to read the book. And for me, the first place in trying to find my mother, I went and spoke to my grandmother, who in Cambodia had lived to be 94 years old. And so she was given the name as grandmother who possessed good blood. I'm going to read a couple excerpts and then open it up for questions. In a country where life expectancy is roughly 61 years for women and 57 years for men, my grandmother had outlived all her friends, many of her children, and a few of her grandchildren. In the village, she was celebrated as Ama Chim La'a, a grandmother who possessed good blood. My grandmother attributes her health to a shot of Hennessy a day. Whenever she had visitors, grandmother didn't ask for gold bracelets, mooncakes, or ripe mangoes, just a bottle of Hennessy. The real stuff, not the imitation. For a woman who could not speak, read, or write English, grandmother knew how to draw the letter H perfectly. I handed her the bottle I brought from America. Hennessy, she eyed the decorated edge of the bottle, nodding her head in approval. Hennessy keeps me warm and living a long time. She chuckled, her gnarled fingers working like claws to unscrew the bottle caps. When she brought her laughs to a stop, she said, "Daughter, you are pretty, but you are old." I was 30 years old. "But I'm not," I began to argue. There was no use arguing with her. In Cambodia, where girls often marry at 16, 17, or 18, at 30 years, I was old. It did not matter that I was educated, had a job, and looked young. In the village, it was all about the numbers, and the number 30 was old. By my age, my sister Ju was not only married, but had given birth to 5 children. And now at 35, she was respected in the village as a woman, wife, and mother. "You listen to your grandmother," she said. "You need to find a good husband. And a good husband needs to be only 2 things. He needs to respect your family, and he needs to love you." Suddenly, my boyfriend Mark's face floated before me, and his eyes the color of a blue ocean, and I was taken aback in America with him. In the moment of his proposal, I had transformed into Rebecca of York, the beautiful healer in Sir Walter Scott's Ivanhoe. My first big book that I read when I was a romantically impressionable 15-year-old. In the novel, Ivanhoe is torn between 2 women, the dark-haired, whirly Rebecca and the blonde, boring Lady Rowena. Ivanhoe's choice of the boring Rowena over the warrioress Rebecca tortured me for months. For if a powerful, exotic, skilled woman with a sword and healing couldn't win the man she desired, what chance did the rest of us brown, slightly challenged, height-challenged, double-jointed girls have of winning the man of our dreams? But there I was, and my Ivanhoe had chosen Rebecca, and I stood on my tiptoes and wrapped my arms around Mark's neck, my face resting above his heart. I could hear it beating. "You're so precious to me," he said. When my Ivanhoe raised my hands to his lips, my feet lifted off the ground. In the night sky, fireworks exploded into colorful bursts. Yes, I wanted to tell him, but I couldn't. And suddenly the fireworks stopped and the sky split open. Like a curtain, cosmic particles that separated my worlds parted. And from behind them, the soldiers appeared. One by one, they amassed, their eyes gleaming. They did not stop arriving until they formed an army. Then as a black swirling mass, they flew after me, their dark shirts and plants flapping in the winds like angels of death, leaving trails of horrors, mass graves, and tears in their wake. And slowly I descended to earth, my elation infused with fear. Next to me, my grandmother noticed my silence and touched my face, bringing me back to the village. Daughter, she said, find a man who loves you. But how do I know this in a man, I asked her. She considered me for a moment and then said, you have to trust your heart. Lulu in the Sky is my journey of trying and finding ways to trust my heart. But how do you do this? How do you do this when your heart has been shattered into so many pieces? When you've suffered so much loss? And when you are still so afraid that the minute you trust your heart, the minute you allow that to happen, the person you gave your heart to would somehow be taken from you. Irrational as it was, what if he died? What if he left? Where would I be? And I couldn't trust my heart. And so I looked for love, and in America, you learn to trust your heart by learning to date, which I didn't know how to do. Now, I have to preface with saying that when I was 13, I told my family I was not going to be arranged in a marriage, which was a big thing. Just because my brother, who was 21, and my sister-in-law, who is 22, worked so hard to leave Cambodia and to bring me to America so that I could have an opportunity at an education, a better life, to make friends, to have job security, to get US citizenship. In their vision of this better life, it did not include dating. For my grandmothers, great-grandmothers, brothers, sister, aunts, uncles, cousins, every single person in my family's marriage had been arranged. I was going to be the first one to say no. So at 13, I broached the topic with my sister-in-law, Young. And this is what she said to me about dating. No dating, no boys. She set down the rules when I was 13. That was how she said it. Not no dating until you turn 16, or no dating until you're 18. Not no dating anyone we don't approve of, anyone we don't know, not while you live under our roof. Nope. Just no datings, no boys. And no boys calling on the phone, no boys visiting a house, no go to boys' homes. But I said, everybody in America dates. I mean, that's how you meet somebody, fall in love, get married. My sister-in-law looked at me, and as usual, all our conversations happened in the kitchen, usually with me stirring something and with my sister-in-law Ian sitting or squatting on the floor, chopping or quartering something. On this day, she was quartering a white featherless chicken on a big round chopping block with a sharp, shiny cleaver. She looked at me, her face scrunching as if she had eaten a sour apple. You're too young to think such nonsense, she said. What in love? What girl know about love? Everywhere here, girls and boys hold hands and kiss for everyone to see. It's bad. Makes girl not pure. In our traditional culture, a girl's most valuable possession was her purity. And once tainted by such thing as holding hands, going on dates, and, oh goodness, kissing. This purity was difficult to get back. My sister-in-law Ian washed her hands and held a fruit up as a demonstration. See this, she said. Girls are like plums. Everyone wants red, ripe plums. Nobody wants fruits everybody has tasted. A plum gets passed around too much, it becomes brown, bruised, and infected with diseases. It turns into ugly, dry, diseased prunes. People throw away old prunes. That was my education into dating. But how? And I didn't know. Lulu in the Sky follows my journey of trying to find love navigating between the old culture and the new culture, sneaking out on dates, rewriting my narrative into who I want to be. This was a path that hasn't been set out and traveled by anybody in my family members. The path of a Cambodian American young woman who's wanted to write her own narrative. And one of the narratives I had to do for myself, in addition to finding love, was to find love for myself. Not only love with another, but to find love for myself. And the first thing I had to do was to break that tie with the war for me. When I first, for a lot of immigrants, refugees, when you arrive at the refugee camp, wherever the camps are in the world, the first two things you have to give to the refugee workers to take down your papers so you can apply for refugee citizenship, for passage to America. It was like, once you have to give them your names in a Western language, in a language you don't know, which explains a lot of funky spellings of refugee names. And two, you've got to give them birthday of some sort. And as a Cambodian orphan child, I didn't know my birthday. Your father often in my culture knew. My mother definitely knew. But she was taken from me when I was 8 years old, so that information was lost with her. And as we stood there at the threshold of getting off the boat in Thailand to go to the refugee camp, we were asked for a birthday. My brother didn't know what it was, and so he decided in that moment to give me April 17th, the day the Khmer Rouge communist regime took over Cambodia and started this genocide for the next 4 years. And this was to be my birthday, so that I would never forget. Every year on April 17th, the war, like an old festering wound, broke open once again. As the date approached, I was reminded of Janie's story in Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And in one eye-opening moment, Janie described her grandmother speaking of the biggest thing God ever made, the horizon. For no matter how far a person can go, the horizon is still way beyond you. And pinched it into such a little bit of a thing that she could tie it around her granddaughter's neck, tight enough to choke her. April 17th was my choker, a date hidden in a golden locket strapped around my neck. By choosing that day as my birthday, my brother had, in much the same way as Janie's grandmother, pinched my horizon. I was not angry with him, for I knew he did not act out of malice. He did not mean to tie me to the war, but to the 2,000 years of Cambodian history. He wanted me to be connected to the Cambodia that produced the largest religious temples in the world, 500-pound catfish and freshwater white dolphins. My brother's Cambodia was fascinating, colorful, vibrant, and musical. It was a nation in which the Khmer Rouge 4-year genocidal rule was merely a blip and not the whole of its history. He wanted me to always remember this Cambodia and all that belonged to it, our family, our home, our culture, and our land. But that wasn't my Cambodia, not yet. My Cambodia was still dominated by mass graves and wars, by our mother's tears and the soldiers who took our father. And every year, this was the Cambodia I remember on a day when I wanted to celebrate with my friends, eat good cake, open presents, and when I got of age, drink myself silly. I knew that on this date, when I was blowing out birthday candles, other Khmers around the world were lighting candles in remembrance of all the lives lost. And as each birthday came and went, it became increasingly unbearable for me to celebrate a date that so many associated with death. So when I turned 18, I decided to leave April 17th behind and choose a new day to celebrate as my birthday. And every year since, I had chosen a different day. I gave myself complete freedom to choose any day I wanted. Another friend's birthday, so I don't have to pay for the party. The solstice, the equinox, the day the groundhog Phil does not see his shadow and predicted a short winter. Any day that wasn't April 17th. And this year, I had chosen June 21st, the first day of winter. Lulu in the Sky also took me back to Cambodia. From learning about my mother's heart to my heart, I had to return and learned about my mother. And so the last parts of the book was about that and about just my desire to just keep her alive. But I didn't know it at the time. And when my mother was taken from me, to this day, I don't know what happened to her, but when you've got somebody taken from you, when you've lost somebody, what your eyes don't see, your mind makes up many, many, many scenarios, each one more horrifying and heartbreaking than the others. And so even though I was on this journey to hold on to her life, I became obsessed with her death. How she died, how she was taken. She was taken with my 4-year-old sister. Did they kill my sister first? Was it possible that they killed my mother first and my sister was there? What was her last moments of life on earth? And in trying to heal her heart and my heart, I realized I had to stop that cycle of violence. I had to stop that cycle of horrors in my heart and also in the stories that I told her descendants. And as a writer, I used the only tool I know. And I went back to Cambodia, went to a temple, took out my pen and paper, and rewrote her last moment of life on earth. And to do this, I reached back into time to find my parents sitting together in the rice fields. First, I whited out the scenes of the soldiers and their guns. Next, I whited out the suffering etched on my parents' faces. I plumped up my mother's cheeks, brightened up her skin, put glints of laughter in my father's eyes, and covered my mother's lips with pink lipstick. And then I dressed my parents in new clothes, a silk blue shirt and silver sarong for my mother, a cool khaki shirt and green pants for my father. I painted their world with tall green palm trees, a perfect blue sky, and a warm, round sun that covered everything in gold. And then I connected their hands so that their fingers clasp. Though in another world, they died apart, both in time and in distance. In this world, they were together. And since it was my creation, I could imagine anything I wanted. So I superimposed all their children into the picture. I painted us grown, happy, and fat. They would have loved that. We sang and danced in the village square as they watched, happy. My parents closed their eyes, at peace at last to leave the world of the living, knowing that we were well, that we could take care of ourselves, that we would take care of one another. And I completed these pictures by painting flocks of white pigeons to carry their souls into the heaven. And there they stay, growing old together in perfect harmony, a love to last all of eternity. I'll leave it at that. Thank you. My brother and sister-in-law, Meng and Ian, brought 2 girls. They came to America and added our first 2 American Ungs, Victoria and Maria. My brother is about to retire from IBM this year, so he'll be splitting his time between Cambodia and America, so he's happy, and my sister-in-law is doing the same thing. Their daughters, Tori, just graduated last year with her dual masters in architecture and business, and she has a job, so she's doing really well. And Maria is a chemistry teacher, and this past year, she won the Milken Family Foundation Award for Teachers, which is the Oscar of teachers. And this is a great story because she's the teacher at Essex Junction High School. And the Milken Family Foundations, they only gave out 40 awards last year for teachers in America. And the organizer came to the high school and told her she won. It was all a big surprise. Nobody knew in front of the auditorium. And then they called her parents up and put them on the intercom or on the speaker. And they told them they won the award and how happy it was. And the parents were like, oh, we're very proud, no matter what. And they were told that there was a cash prize, which they heard to be $2,500. And they said, oh, that's great, that's wonderful. They called me up and told me about it. And then I went on the internet and Googled it. And I saw the number. It was not 2,500, it was 25,000. So then I called them back up again. And told them the real numbers, at which point they squeal with happiness. And I just thought, really? I hope you did that when they put you on the speaker, you know? So they were really, really thrilled, and we continued to have adventures with the English language. Has any of my family been over to America to visit us? Those of us in America have all been back to Cambodia. I've myself made over 30 trips back to Cambodia as a sister daughter and also as a human rights activist and a staff for the Veterans International programs. And again, the information's in the back of my book if you want to learn more about how we are really assisting people with having mobility, one person, one limb, one leg at a time. My brother Kim eventually did make it to America, and via Cambodia to Thailand, Thailand to Germany, Germany to Russia, Russia to France, France to America. It took 12 years for him to make it to America. And because in the U.S. we have this immigration policy where if you are a parent or a child, you have a much easier time of being reunited with your family members. But if you're a sibling, that somehow doesn't have the same cachet. So now he is in L.A. And those of you who read Firstly Killed My Father, he was very traumatized as being the 12-year-old son who had to go and steal food and was beaten by soldiers. And today, he's actually a pastry chef at the Peninsula Hotels in Beverly Hills, which is a 5-star, I think 5 diamond hotel. But none of my other family have, no other sibling have been to America. I had such a good time because my sister and I are very close today. So she is now a grandmother for the second time. And she is 44 years old. And she's extremely happy and would like to visit. And so I think we'll probably make that happen soon. Yes, am I still active on landmine issues? I'm still a supporter of the landmine issue, but specifically of the projects we have in Cambodia. And the landmine issue was a huge issue that was started in 1991 by 2 groups, Veterans International, which is the group that I've worked for since 1997, and Medical International, which is a German-based group. And together they came and formed with 2 groups and called themselves the International Campaign to Ban Landmines, which eventually grew to very, very big to consist of over 120 countries. And in the US Campaign to Ban Landmines have over 200 different organizations. So that work of the international campaigns goes on to work with governments to stop putting mines in the ground, to also allocate resources and developments to remove mines from the ground. And for programs like ours, Veterans International Cambodia, we have centers that manufacture prosthetic limbs. And so that is a component of the work that's very important. Again, in Cambodia, we have over 45,000 amputees, and it's estimated that anywhere that 1 of 250 Cambodians an amputee. In the US, it's 1 of 22,000. And that's primarily due to accidents. At our center, we have met so many people, and in particularly that really why I'm so passionate about it, because I'm so angry about it. Weapon system, weapons of war. When war ends, if it's a tank or guns or helicopters, they get taken back home. But if it's a landmine, these relic little weapon systems that cost $1 to $3, and once in the ground takes $500 to $1,000, gets left behind. For adults, it's a lifetime of pain and scars. For children, it's a lifetime of pains and scars revisited. And I've met so many children who've been harmed by landmines. And depending on how well the amputations were made, how fast they grew, every 6 months, 8 months, a year and a half, they have to go to a center and have their limbs cut and recut and cut and recut again until they stop growing. Because your stumps heal, and your bone, a child's bone, will continue to grow and will protrude out of the stump. And so at our center, we can manufacture now a prosthetic limb for about $25, a prosthetic leg from the leg down for about $50. And I asked you, how many pair of shoes do you have in your closets? And how much assistance and charities and generosity goes toward giving someone else a chance to not only survive the peace, but thrive in peace. So that is, and because now in addition to writing and owning a bar, restaurant, and a microbrewery, I am now focusing my attention only on the prosthetic centers in Cambodia. My favorite food in Cambodia, I have a love for fried crickets. It's really, food is about nostalgia, isn't it? You know, the famous commercial about Maxwell House coffee, and when it's all with the mother and the father, and it's all memories. And so for me, it's crickets. And my memories with fried crickets are of being in a movie theater before the war with my family of 9, when we were happy, when we were intact, when we were full. And then in the dark, and my mother was busy with everybody, my father would cross his legs like perfect ways that father knows how to do. And I was 5 years old before the war came, and I would just plop my behind on his lap. And I would hold my fried crickets, which is much crunchier than popcorn. And I'd be eating them like popcorn, watching gods and goddesses and monkey kings fight each other. The epic wars of good and evil. And when I got bored of holding my food, I would just tap my father's hand. And without communication, verbal communication, he would turn his palms upward, and I would put my food and drinks in his hands. Because to this day, we still don't have cup holders in Cambodia. But if you are a child and you have grandparents and parents and aunts and uncles, there are no need for cup holders. And for those of you who've had gum and spit and everything else, booger in your hands, who needs cup holders? And so I love fried crickets. I have to say now I have an affinity for fried tarantulas. I like to say they're like tater tots. To me, they are. You just have to get over the fact that they're spiders, tarantulas, giant spiders. But I have to say, though, if you have a fear of spiders, which many Americans seem to do, all you have to do is eat them. But I do like those delicacy, and they go so well with margaritas. What part of healing has the writing been for me? It has been a tremendous healing, because I kept a journal as a child. When I first came to the U.S., and to this day, I still find the English language somewhat insane, because you have grammar rules, and then you have rules. They have exceptions for the rules, and then you have exceptions for the exceptions for the rules. And we don't have such rules. We don't have tenses. We don't have plurals. We don't have conjunctions in the Chinese and Cambodian languages that I do speak. And the other hard thing was for me, conversational English. And even to this day, and I've lived in America over 30 years now, there are still words that I know and I understand that I just cannot pronounce. And for me, because I couldn't speak it, and because the one time I remember telling a girl in junior high school about what happened to my family, she looked at me and said, "I don't believe you." And how in that moment, and I don't remember it, I wasn't able to decipher it as much. All I knew was that I was paralyzed. I was angry, but now looking back, and I was thinking, what did she think of me? My first thought was, how can you not believe me? Who do you think I am to make up the death and executions of my father? And then I wonder, do you think I am actually that broken? Do you think I am that damaged that I would actually make this up? And so writing for me has been a vehicle to speak these thoughts without fearing that I would be judged, not believed, questioned. The work of turning your writing into published work has been very therapeutic as well. I decided to publish my book, the first They Killed My Father, because I had taken the position with the Vietnam Veterans of America Foundation and working for the Veterans International Cambodia program. And I needed a vehicle to talk about the larger piece of war and landmines and peace, because war and landmines does not exist in a vacuum. It exists because trauma and horrors and soldiers have been there. And in the process of writing, though, I learned that there is real power in the naming of things. In the naming of things. You know, and this has been practiced in many ancient cultures. But as a child, the war, for the most part, existed in this mythological sort of size. Because we were told that the soldiers, one Khmer Rouge soldiers, common soldiers, could take 20 of his enemy out. And that to gain power, sometimes after they killed their enemies, they opened them up, take their livers and body parts and ate them to give them superhuman strength. And so all of that child's imagination and belief in God and the larger world gets mixed in this war that is man-created and human thought. So in the writing of things, in the naming of things, I had to do research and learn that it was communism, it was Maoism, it was Marxism, it was soldiers, it was landmines. And when you take that mythological away from what the violence was about, they cease to have power or reduces their power to cross into your spiritual world. And so for me, that writing has been really wonderful, and it has saved a lot of money from therapy sessions. Am I planning to write another book? Yes. I'm actually working on, I've been working on for a while on a historical fiction about Angkor Wat. So there'll be tigers and lions and bears, and then there'll be romance. And then there'll be tramplings and war, and then there'll be kissing. Finally after this book, I've come to realize that I like this writing thing. I resisted it because my degree is in political science, and my conscious goal when I was growing up in the US was that I wanted to have a voice. And this book is in large part also about finding my voice and speaking loud and proud and claiming my voice. And also refusing to be silent. But for me, I thought that meant to be an activist, to be an advocate. And now I realize that as an activist, we can be activists in whatever form, whatever capacity, whatever abilities that we have in our lives. It's like that Nike slogan, you just do it. Whether it's an hour a day, 2 weeks a month, or a week a year, you do it because it matters and it makes a difference. And now I am contributing not only as a writer and as an activist, but as a business owner. I use my space to raise funds for the Democratic Party in Cleveland. And I use our restaurants to raise money for 10,000 villages. And we use local purveyors to try to keep our world green. So there are so many different ways we can actually contribute to our world. Is my work being read in Cambodia? It is. For those of you who've been to Cambodia, you know that I have the best marketers and promoters in Cambodia, and they come in forms of the street children and the street vendors, and basically they're sold everywhere. They're sold in paper, in pirated copies.
That's how I got the first book.
Oh, yeah. Yes, yes.
A young child with a basket.
Sir, you owe me 25 cents.
The thing was in
But I'll take it as charity. But it's still French, it's still 25 cents. It doesn't matter the language. I do not have publishing rights, but in Cambodia, I actually, I had my work. First, they killed my father and Lucky Child translate into Khmer, and then I donated the work, the rights to the work, to DCCAM, the Cambodian Documentation Center, that have been there since 1995, gathering information about the Khmer Rouge to support the tribunal, to try the leaders for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. And so that has been my gift to the human rights group. In Cambodia, I've been there a lot, and so I don't know if you got the copy with my signature on it, because that would cost you probably 50 cents more. I started going back, and so once the vendors started to know me, they would gather around me, all of them with their basket of books, and I would do an impromptu book signing in the market. So I would sign my name, and they would go and sell, and then I'd sign by the author. The book usually costs $3, but we want $3.50 because it's got her John Hancock on it, and it's special. But then tourists wouldn't believe them. So the kids and the vendors would come back and say, well, you got to write a sentence now. So I then had to go from signing my name to going, yes, this is Luong Ung, and yes, I am in Cambodia. You can follow me. But yeah, it's been pirated. So you just give it to the charity later. That's fine. What is Mark like? You know, Lulu in the Sky is about love. And the funny thing about love is that it really is difficult to navigate. And you know that in America there is that famous quote, love is kind, love is patient. And for me, love was fear. Love was fear. And my big fear was and the big journey of this book and my big fear was, here is this kind, wonderful, patient man who is 6'2", blonde and blue eyes, of Swedish, Irish, German descent. And I just said, I told my family, I'm going to pick my husband. And I've gotten involved with somebody they don't know much about. And I kept him a secret, and that's a big part of the book, was that I was so fearful. I kept Mark a secret from my family for 10 years. So when I say patient, I mean patient. 10 years. They never met him. They never crossed paths. They didn't even know he existed for 10 years. And fortunately for me, he was just so kind, and he knew the fear that resided so deep in my heart. And the journey for me of writing this book was realizing that my biggest fear, that seems irrational to my adult mind, but to my child's heart, made all the sense in the world. 3 months after my father, we learned, or was told my father was executed, and my mother sent us into the war zone, my sisters, brother, and I, and told us to leave her. And when I didn't want to, she turned me by my shoulders, pushed me out the door, and said, get out. And what I heard was, I don't want you. And in that, I heard, I don't love you. And how is it possible to change that message as an adult and to believe that somebody who is kind and patient and wonderful could love me if my mother didn't want me? And so I had to learn, and going back to Cambodia, and threw a big party and invited my mother's best friends and my uncles and her childhood friends, and then interview them and learn about my mother, who I thought was so different from me when I was a child, who was so disapproving of me because I was such a tomboy. When my sister liked to wear pretty dresses and put flowers in their hairs, I had a chicken for a pet that I put into a fight. I know that's not the right PC thing in America, but we were in Cambodia. And then to realize that my mother was a rebel in her own time, that she ran away with my father, in that she suffered for making her own decision and she chose her own husband, in a time when no one else did. And that she loved, like I do, riding her bicycle very fast down the hills in the countryside. And that when she got to that perfect speed, she did what I always do, which is to raise my hand in the air, let my hair fly, eat a couple of bugs, and feel the wind lift up my skirt and expose my legs and feel my power and strength. And my mother did this. And we were so much alike. And how surprising is it that I realized that now I know I was like her, a lot like her. And also realizing through writing this book that she knew I was like her. I'm not a parent, but for those of you who are parents, you know the child that most resemble you, whether or not you tell them. And so it was through really the acceptance of my mother and realizing that she did what she had to do to save me. And that allowed me to heal my heart and to allow it to be open once again to Mark, who is kind and wonderful and very patient and very tall. Yeah. Since 1997, there have been negotiations to create a tribunal to try the Khmer Rouge for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. And actually, I was working and supported and got involved with a group called Coalition for International Justice, and we've been advocating for this. They had a trial in 2010, and they convicted one guy, Doik, who was the director of Tuol Sleng, otherwise known as S21 Security Center in Cambodia, which was formerly a high school that had been turned into a prison torture center during the Khmer Rouge era. And in that span of 4 years, over 14,000 people were brought in, people who the Khmer Rouge perceive as their enemies. And in the Khmer Rouge genocide, the communist group went in to create this pure utopian agrarian society where power would be taken from the leader of the country and given to the poor and the peasants. And where the worth of your human life was how fast, how well you could work in the field to produce rice to support their war. And everything in our lives were dictated, controlled, restricted. So anybody and everybody who did not believe this vision, who suspected of not believing in this vision, who were suspected of possibly speaking up against this vision and this mission, were deemed as enemy of the state and traitors to the country. And so people were taken to all these security centers in the country, and the most famous one is the one right inside the city of Phnom Penh, which is today populated by, I think, over 2 million people. And right in the city, where these people were tortured and then killed in the killing fields of Cambodia. And again, in Cambodia, this country the size of the state of Oklahoma, is today littered with over 20,000 mass graves. 20,000 mass graves. So this guy, Doik, who's the director of the center, was found guilty and convicted and sentenced to 35 years in prisons and 11 years served for having been waiting for the trial. So now he's got 19 years left. And that has been appealed to give him more sentences. They are now looking to put 4 more leaders on trial, and that is still ongoing. For me personally, there's not going to be any kind of justice, and there's a long negotiation of what this tribunal should look like. The group that all those who were involved looked at the ICC, the International Criminal Court, the Truth and Reconciliation in Africa. They looked at the Cambodian court system. They looked at the U.S., and in the end, they came out with a combination, otherwise, or a mixed system that consisted of international judges and Cambodian judges, 3 Cambodian judges, 2 international judges to indict, convict, sit through the trials. There's not going to be any kind of trials that would ever find justice for what happened and for the lives lost. But what benefits I do see in Cambodia is that this process allowed us to centralize the information, to get the story out, to give survivors the space and time to tell their story, to be believed, to be heard. 60% of Cambodians grew up after the war, and this really just until 2 years ago the story of the history of the Khmer Rouge have not been taught in schools. And so children don't know about it. So many children don't know about it. And parents have found it very difficult to talk about it. It's very similar to survivors of Holocaust in Rwanda of the genocide. It's that right after, they could not talk about it. And it's estimated that 50% of Cambodians are suffering through some kind of PTSD, anxiety attacks, headaches, flashbacks, many other triggers that they're still finding out. And those in America suffer the same thing. And so I was there for the first day of the tribunal, and being able to sit in this courtroom, and I saw how it could, how it benefited the country in that way. For in this small room of about 400 or so people, there were a group of 29 students who took the day off from the university, and then a group of villagers, people who've suffered and lost their loved ones in that prison, and then a group of a dozen or so or 2 monks in orange robes. And as all this is sitting, the monks were just sitting there with their eyes closed, almost as if they were meditating and trying to heal the space. And in my conversations with the people, and then the trials broadcast and serialized in newspapers and television, so students were learning about it. And I was talking to one university student who had her own aha moment. And I said to her, "Do you believe?" Because that is the hardest thing for a survivor, is when you tell your story and you are not believed. It is crazy making. Is it possible that you've gone through this and people don't know about it and they don't believe you? Is it in your mind? And so I asked the girl and said, "Do you believe?" She said, "At first I didn't." She said, "At first I didn't." She said, "And then I heard on the radios and I saw in the newspaper and talked to people and they were telling such similar stories." And she said, "They all cannot be lying." And it's a little sad in that, because she said, they all cannot be lying. Is that how far it takes for people to believe us? To think that we cannot be lying? What about if you just think we are telling the truth? But it's a long journey, and so for that child, she just, that was her aha moment, that all of us cannot be lying. And so the tribunal's got a lot of political issues. There's corruptions and all that. And my answer to all of that is in the US, we've had 200 plus years to create some kind of working democracy and court system. In Cambodia, our first election happened in 1995. And it's a country with 2,000-year-old history. I guess I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much. Thank you.